Alright guys, got another subscriber submitted story for you today. This one's called THC Induced Cosmic Horror by Shane Smith. I want to start this story by giving a little backstory and providing some context and maybe some reason for why these events unfolded the way they did. For a year before this event, I used heroin every day. Needless to say, I was very addicted, sometimes consuming over a gram a day. That's about $60 a day. One day, after multiple quitting attempts, I decided I would double down and attempt to cold turkey off of this substance. I planned to use kratom and THC oil tea to lighten the withdrawal effects. While this may have been a rational or even optimal way to overcome the withdrawal symptoms for some, it turned out to be a complete nightmare for me. The THC was already prepared by my stepmother, who has disliked me due to recent events related to my addiction. I asked her for some of the tea she had prepared, assuring me that it was mild, as I had no tolerance to THC at the time, and I'm prone to pretty severe cannabis anxiety. She gives me a large coffee cup full of this THC oil-infused beverage, and I proceed to drink it. I was about halfway through the cup when I started to notice the effects. Recognising it as typical effects of THC, I didn't pay much attention to it. Until about 30 minutes afterwards, I started to feel very dissociated and confused. I felt as though my surroundings were becoming increasingly distant and unfamiliar, similar to a moderate dose of ketamine. My heart rate began to increase and panic began to take hold. I decided to walk around to calm my increasingly overwhelming anxiety symptoms. This was when I began to notice some severe visual distortions. Every object I walked towards seemed to grow rather than get closer and vice versa. This effect happens on psilocybin quite frequently for me, but at least I can rationalise that as psilocybin just being psilocybin. I couldn't explain this at all. It didn't seem possible for THC to be so potent. Time began to come to an almost standstill, and this is where the nearly indescribable physical symptoms started to take effect. I no longer felt connected to my body in any meaningful way whatsoever. My sense of touch completely disappeared, and an intense, all-encompassing pins and needles overtook me. Whenever I touched the surface, it felt like I was going through the object. I was horrified, and could not make sense of what was happening to me at the time. I tried to calm myself, but there was absolutely nothing I could do. I felt like I was trapped in a never-ending loop of suffering. How could such a benign drug such as THC do such a thing? Had my stepmother laced me? Was I going insane? These thoughts began looping over and over in my head until I couldn't take it anymore. I ended up dialing 911. However, this wasn't an easy task because I could no longer feel my hands or have an accurate idea of how to operate a phone. Things became increasingly blurry from here, but I managed to dial 911. It took about 7 minutes to arrive, but this felt like forever, and I was losing my shit. Once the paramedics arrived, they put me on a stretcher and began asking me what I had taken. I had a feeling they didn't believe I had only taken THC, but this could have been due to severe paranoia. They had me breathe through a straw to calm down, but this didn't last for long until I was overwhelmed with a sense of cosmic dread. I remember closing my eyes at one point and feeling like I was falling back into eternity. I felt like I was trapped in an infinite loop of ineffable torture. My body felt like it was being pulled apart in every direction. I was completely losing my grasp on reality. I began screaming at the top of my lungs and fighting for my life. This terrified the paramedics, and they threatened to call the police if I didn't stop. It was out of my control though. They ended up strapping me down and giving me oxygen. At one point on this infinitely long, horrific hospital ride in the ambulance, I opened my eye and felt like I was in a completely foreign reality. The paramedics appeared to me as some alien entities, and the environment seemed to me as some sort of spacecraft. I thought they were performing experiments on me, and I felt like the hospital bed was some object used to crucify people. I felt like some entities were crucifying me. There are no words in the human language to describe the pain and fear I felt at that moment. I was mortified. There was no doubt in my mind that this would last for eternity. Finally, we arrived at the hospital. I began demanding the staff to give me benzos to help calm me down. I was furious at them for not giving them to me right then and there. I was cursing at them with every vulgar word I could think of. They eventually gave me an IV with Ativan. I can only remember bits and pieces after this, but I do remember vague images of them coming into the hospital room and asking me questions. I ended up waking about 14 hours later, covered in blood and bruises. I'd torn my IV out in a fit of rage and gotten blood all over the place. Aside from feeling a bit spaced out, I felt pretty normal, and they proceeded to discharge me. Looking back, I don't believe my tea was laced with anything other than THC, but I do think it had something to do with the fact that I was going through heroin withdrawals and that my mental health at the time was pretty out of balance. We seem to underestimate the power of THC. The effects of drugs are entirely subjective from individual to individual, but I would not recommend taking such a high dose of anything psychedelic in a bad state of mind.